Good morning, everybody. This is Brian Williams from 401k and Beyond. We're excited about today's show. We're going live with Chantel Sheaks, and she's joining us from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She is Vice President of Retirement Policy. And before we came live, we were just talking about what an exciting last 3 years it's been as we go through the timeline from association retirement plans to the first Secure Act, and then we went into obviously the coronavirus, followed by the CARES Act, and now we're potentially knocking on the door of Secure Act 2 and throw PEPs in the mix. So good morning. How are you?
Busy.
Busy. I know. But I know one thing you won't be doing today, which is going to opening day for the Nationals, as you got a rainy, drizzly across the country. It's an issue for opening day. So getting a lot of postponements already.
Well, fingers crossed. Hopefully the storms will be out and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of your content, and you're very big on the big picture stuff, right down through the chambers, right down to helping small businesses, which is exciting. What prompted this particular discussion was based on some briefs that you filed to talk about the excessive retirement plan fees lawsuits, which have really exploded over the last 2 or 3 years, some with merit, some without. I want to talk before we get into that, which could probably get a little bit technical. Small business retirement plans. We're talking about the local locksmith or baker. Over the last few years, they've been focused on so many other issues. Why is now the right time for some of these organizations to look at retirement benefits for their employees?
Well, personally, just because I do this for a living, I think the right time is always now. But if you think about it, even bigger picture is one of the things we're working on at the chamber overall with most of our members is the worker shortage. And so what can you do as a small employer? We know it's difficult sometimes for small employers to really compete with other employers, but people are wanting that differential. They want that factor. And so it's not just good for your employees, it's also going to be good for you as something to attract employees right now.
Right. And to keep them too. There's a lot of employee turnover. Even the number of no-shows is amazing. I talked to small businesses that say, yeah, we hired somebody last Thursday to start on Monday and they never even showed up. So certainly adding a more robust benefit package can hopefully help with that.
Oh, exactly. And it's also there to help to plan for the future, which one of the things I think what employers can do to help their employees, no matter what your size is, it's very difficult. I know I can't even think about what I'm going to do tomorrow. So the role of the employer is really to help that employee to think not just right now, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and using a retirement plan as a tool is one of those things that you can do.
Right. And one of the things that's been most exciting to me in my career is the shift from 401k and workplace retirement accounts from being a product to now really it is more of a service, right? It's more of workplace financial wellness. And I know the industry and the U.S. Chamber has made a lot of, expresses how important that is to small businesses too.
Oh, definitely.
Going back to association retirement plans, and then we had Secure Act, which had some significant tax credits. So, and it was a really exciting time. And then we walked right into the brick wall of the coronavirus as local chambers and small businesses were, of course, focused on other things like keeping their employees and staying open. Do you feel like now you're starting to see some momentum with that pick back up again?
I think people are in the process of starting to think about it. But again, we need other people to help. It's not something, whether it's a small business, whether it's an association, you can't just say, look, I have a retirement plan right now. So I always like to say that the retirement plan, it's a community, because it takes a community to build up a retirement plan, which is the good thing about this community is that we don't make it seem that way. So for our employees, it seems like it's just magic and it just kind of appears there and money goes from their paycheck it grows over a lifetime and there you have it. But I think that it's going to take, a lot more for the community to start outreach. But we're seeing that is that, again, like with anything, you have to take care of your immediate needs before you can take care of your future needs. And once we start taking care of more of those immediate needs, I think that we could start going forward.
Right. I agree with that. I mean, the retirement plans, it's never front of the burner issue for small businesses. It's always, healthcare is usually a priority, or anything we've had to deal with over the last couple of years is going to be. Now you've got state plans requiring it. You've got state mandates coming out, so maybe that'll start to push it to
But
maybe more of an immediate issue.
one thing I think that has made it more of an immediate issue, and that with the past 2 years, is emergency savings and the need for emergency savings and the interplay. And there are a lot of different. It's interesting. Is what we're supporting is there's a lot of different legislation that's going on in Washington about emergency savings. A lot of different talk. Should it be a sidecar? Should it be in plan? Should it be whatever it might be? Our view is we want as many options as possible, because some options may be easier for a large employer, some might be easier for a small employer. For example, where you could just have an in-plan distribution. Some people may not think it's optimal because of leakage. However, if you're a smaller employer, you may not have that bandwidth also to be able to set up the emergency savings or the sidecar, but you know what you can do best. And so another thing that I think why now is kind of the right time for employers who may not have a retirement plan or who haven't looked at their retirement plan is because what we saw during the pandemic is Americans need to save. And it's not just for retirement, but it's for that emergency savings. And the way we look at it is, if you look at the here and now of what you need for your emergency savings, that gets people who may not have been saving before in the habit of saving. And so once you hit that emergency savings, it's not really you're already in that habit. So that money can just then go easily over to your retirement plan. So it's getting people in that habit. And this is, we saw what happened. So let's not have that happen again.
Right. And you've had 401k plans have loans and hardships and those type of provisions over time. But I think something that's, maybe having the first even $1,000 or $2,000 being readily available, without penalty, without tax consequences. I think that might be a good option for a lot of folks.
Oh, definitely. And again, we don't think there's a one size fits all, because there's not. But we do know the need for, I was joking with some friends of mine. They're like, oh, why are you calling it emergency savings? It's just savings. People need that buffer, whatever it is, before, but this will get people started in the habit.
Right. And the 401k it's just so easy to save through the workplace. I mean, those numbers about, people are far more likely to save through their paycheck before it even comes to them, right? The idea of having it come to their checking account and then having a draft or even writing a check somewhere else just doesn't happen.
Yeah. If I don't see it, I don't miss it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So with these lawsuits that we've seen over the last few years, so the U.S. Chamber here, and I'll share the screen quick here to the Bloomberg article. So they're calling it a unique court strategy. Would you consider this a unique court strategy?
I think for us, it is a little bit unique. Typically speaking, we file in the appellate courts and the Supreme Court. We have very robust practice there. We don't often file as much in the district court because you're not sure, what the outcome is that if you file in the district court, then file in the appellate court. For those of you who haven't done litigation, I will say as default, I'm a recovering attorney. I'm a recovering litigator. I think I'm on step number 4 right now, but this keeps pulling me back into the litigation and my attorney life. But some of these cases can go on forever. I did have one case that I was involved in that went on for 12 years.
Wow.
And then it was remanded back down to the district court. So then it went on, I think the longest ERISA case I ever knew about was 17 years. So
Wow.
they take some time. You could have your child born and go to college by the time the case is resolved. But what we're trying to do, and you normally don't see, I think I should step back a little bit. When I first started practicing, I'm not going to say when because it's a very long time ago, is you would see an individual claims. It's probably over the past 4 or 5 years that you just saw these class action claims that are coming up. And so what's happening, what we started seeing with all these class actions coming, because usually why we wouldn't file in the lower courts, because it would be one case and then it would be done. But now what we're seeing is, I think BNA has done, aging myself again, Bloomberg has done a great job of collecting all of these cases. We're seeing over 200 cases filed.
Mhm.
And I believe it was back in 2015 when I first saw this, when I saw a plan that only had $10 million in assets. Because these started with the jumbo plans,
Sure.
the massive plans, the massive employers. And now we're seeing, I think one that really surprised us all where we did file was the Red Cross,
Mm.
is that no one is safe. It doesn't matter if you're small, it doesn't matter if you're large. And so that's when we started thinking, well, what can we do about this? Because for many people, and I know many of your clients and many of our members, if I say the word ERISA, everybody gets scared.
Right.
They think it's the most complex, the most frightening thing in the world. I mean, it can be. I've read most of it. But what the plaintiff side is doing is they're using the perceived complexity to try to get settlements. And what we were afraid of is, again, I did try to look at everything from the bigger picture, is that this isn't just one case. This is having an industry impact, and it's having a big impact, and especially it's going to have on some of our smaller employers, because what we're seeing now is with the insurance industry, you have to insure your plan. You just have to. But what happens if you can't get insurance? And because of all these cases and these cases settling, the insurance premiums have gotten a lot higher. And the deductibles have gotten a lot higher. So often people will think that this is like a victimless crime because, well, it's just the insurance company that's paying for it. Well, ultimately, somebody does pay for it. And if you're a smaller employer and you see the premiums going up, or even if you're a large employer and the premiums are going up, the deductibles are going up, money's fungible. It has to come from somewhere. And that means it might be, well, maybe the match won't be as robust.
Mhm.
Maybe we won't pay the administrative fees. So on that bigger picture, that's really what we were looking at. And also, I'll get into a little bit of the courts if you want, but that's big part of the reason why we decided to do this.
Right. And it's the unintended consequence of where these might have started with good intention. We're trying to lower plan fees. We're trying to make these organizations more accountable for their fiduciary roles. At the same time, it might end up having the opposite effect, where because of the cost of ERISA bonds or fiduciary liability insurance, those costs end up being pushed back to the employees, which is completely the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Well, and also one of the things that was bothersome for us is this is, as you know, it's a voluntary system right now.
Mhm.
And, we always joke in the ERISA world, no good deed goes unpunished. But if you look at a lot of these cases, the plan sponsors just left like this, like, I don't know what to do, because one of, I won't say my favorite, but a very disturbing case was when they claimed that $35 per year for the administrative fees was excessive.
Mhm.
Now, no basis for that, no reason for that, no benchmarking, just saying $35 is too much. Well, then the answer came back and the plan said, well, actually, no, we only charge 30. And what's
Crazy.
even more bothersome from that is, as you know, plans are required to give that disclosure 4 times a year to participants. So the plaintiff should have had that information. Yet
Right.
they're claiming that it was overcharging, but it's really not. And so they put all of this in front of a court to make it look very confusing. And then what is a plan sponsor supposed to do? And another thing that is very difficult, we're seeing a lot of plan sponsors, you'll have one case that will say, oh, you breached your fiduciary duty because you invested in a CIT, a collective investment trust. And then the very next case is, oh, you breached your fiduciary duty because you didn't invest in a collective investment trust. You breached your fiduciary duty because you had an index fund. You breached your fiduciary duty because you had a managed. And if there's any type of investment, any type of people have been sued over. So
Yeah, absolutely.
what we're trying to get to the courts is, unfortunately, what happens in the United States, very big country. And so these judges, one judge might see one judge might see, and they don't realize everything that's going on around the United States. And so what we're trying to do is educate the courts of what's really happening outside of the courtroom and showing the nationwide problem and the bigger picture problem with this.
Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting about these cases is sometimes I read these and I say, oh my goodness, how can a company of that size have made such a big mistake? I mean, certain share class issues and all of that. But now we've gone past the point where, like you said, they can be a little bit ridiculous with some of the things that they bring up. But what can the small businesses, somebody who's watching this who has 10 employees, is there anything they can do to it's not likely they're going to have one of these big ERISA cases, but is there anything they should be doing or should be looking at to help give their plan a better outlook?
Well, definitely, is we always just say, don't disregard, like, make sure you have an investment policy strategy. And also, one of the things that we try to say is ERISA is about process. And that is one of the things that we're fighting in these cases is, even like you said, sometimes you'll read these, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did this. ERISA is not based on hindsight, because if it were based on hindsight and you had the best investment, well, you probably wouldn't need to be an ERISA fiduciary. You could be doing something else if you could pick the best investment all the time.
Yeah.
So what we say is make sure you have that process down. Make sure you document what you're doing. And if you don't have the ability to do it, which many small employers don't, that's why we go back to what I said at the very beginning. It takes an entire community to build a retirement plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I don't expect you, if you're building widgets, to know what the best investment strategy is. But you can go out and find someone who will do that for you, and making sure you document what you did, you document what your choices were, and you document either what you went through or what someone else went through. And I do think another thing that we're seeing is that, some with the association retirement plans, and we also see with the PEPs. So if you feel that you can't do it, I think now is one of the best times, especially for small employers, that there's so many more options available than, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
Right. I agree. And we talk PEPs, we're talking about pooled employer plans.
Yes.
I know our industry is so caught up in jargon. Sometimes we forget that people might not know
PEPs,
what that is.
MEPs,
But we're talking about, I know. Yeah. MEPs, PEPs, simple SEPs, right? That's so many options out there. And yeah, the ability of employers to band together and have some sort of continuity across their plans is definitely an advantage for certain small businesses of certain size, and with the PEPs being able to avoid audits and things like that once they get over that 100 employee threshold can be helpful. What is the U.S. Chamber, or how about even local chambers? What can they do to sort of lead this discussion? Sometimes local chambers might be concerned about overstepping or concerned about their fiduciary liability or responsibility. Is there anything they can do from an informational standpoint?
Well, one of the things, what we do, obviously, we have our amicus programs going on. I do quite a bit, do quite a bit of advocacy on behalf. But I would also suggest the Department of Labor actually has some very good information out, especially for small employers, of what is your fiduciary responsibility, how to even choose a plan. The Internal Revenue Service, surprisingly, has all of the information. And unfortunately, it doesn't get out very much. So one of the things that we encourage local chambers to do, if somebody does have a question, that's a great place to start, is by directing people to the Department of Labor, directing them to the IRS, because I do know even for a small employer, like you just said, it's like, do I do a SEP? What do I do? And there's pages specific for small employers.
Yeah, and that really is a good point. There is a lot of great content out there from Department of Labor, from the IRS in terms of how to manage your plan, and even from the SEC on how to control fees and why fees matter. So there is a lot of good content out there. So even pushing somebody in that direction. Also, we sometimes like to beat up on the IRS and the government for obvious reasons, but they've done a lot of things over the last 2 or 3 years to make these programs. When you look at some of the tax credits and as we've talked about, association retirement plans, perhaps they've really done a lot over the last 3 years to help small businesses.
Yeah, and most recently they did come out with some more guidance that it's proposed rules, but some of it, as you may recall, the one bad apple rule, which was an impediment for many of the multiple employer plans, that if one person kind of messed up, then everybody within the plan messed up, which just wasn't a good rule. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. As why should one person ruin it for everyone? So I think in that ways, they're really taking steps and going forward to try to make it easier for well, in some ways. I mean, there are other things that they're doing that we're providing comments and we want to make it easier. But I think that is the first place to start looking. And also,
I'm sorry, go
Oh, go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was
And
going
the
to say another
industry,
thing.
the industry itself has done a really good job as far as increasing technology and lowering fees. I mean, the amount of downhill pressure on fees has been tremendous over the last decade or so, really since the fee disclosure acts and a lot of that stuff.
Well, and another thing, I think it has just become easier to have a plan because it's easier to move money. I was
Mhm.
at a conference yesterday, and one of the things I was just talking about is it's just data.
Mhm.
And, back in the day where you had to physically move the money from the payroll over there, those days are gone. So now, even just setting up a plan for one or two employees is much easier than it ever could be.
Right. And from a feature standpoint, I mean, 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, if you had 20 employers or less, you were probably stuck in a really expensive plan that wasn't great for your employees. But now, I mean, if you've got, 5, 10 employees, you can have as good a plan as the Fortune 500 company. You can really get down to the least expensive share classes and all those same features, auto enrollment, auto escalate. They're all available right down to small businesses. And that's what's exciting for me is there's no difference between a 5-person plan and a 50,000 person plan really at this point.
Yeah, but it just takes the effort to go and do that. And again, that's one of the things that we recognize. And I think one of the things the local chambers can do is even just that explanation of, don't get me wrong, setting up a retirement plan can be difficult. It has its ups, it has its downs, but the importance that you get for yourself and for your employees
Mhm.
is magnified by the effort that it takes. But you just have to get over that first step of thinking, oh, well, only the large employers can do it. And getting over that first step, I think, is the most important step.
And with those briefs that you filed, what's the expected outcome there? What do you think? What are you looking to have accomplished by filing those?
Well, one of the things that we're looking obviously is I don't think people understand how expensive litigation is.
Mm.
That this doesn't come cheap, and this is not cheap for us to do either. But it's something we really, believe in to help our members, and we're hoping that it will slow down, if not put an end to some of these cases when the judges see the bigger picture of what's happening. And that I did analysis of a few of the cases, and most of these cases are settling, which is unfortunate because the more these cases settle, the more plaintiffs bring them on.
Mhm.
Because if I can just bring a case and within a year I settle and in attorney's fees I get $1.3 million, which in one case, when I did the math on it, even being generous, it translated that settlement amount translated to $22 per participant, and the attorney's fees were over 1.3 million.
Yeah.
So what we're hoping is to educate the judiciary so that these cases can be dismissed very early on
Mm.
instead of being like that case that I told you about that went on for 17 years.
Yeah.
Um, that is what we don't want, but we also want judges to be we want to be able to protect fiduciaries because we want to encourage people to set up plans ultimately.
Mhm.
And part of it is that discretion that you have in setting up your plan, that there is no set fee, that the plaintiffs try to make it very black and white to say it only costs $30, it only costs $25 for administrative fees. But that's not true because administrators, it depends on what you buy. That if I buy just pure administrative services, it may only be 25, it may only be 30. But what if I want to buy education? What if I want to buy investment services? What if I want to buy compliance services?
Mhm.
And we don't want to discourage employers from buying services and including services that would be very good for their participants, and instead just going to that bare bone service that we do know. And I'm sure, Brian, I'm sure you've seen this in your practice. It's really confusing to invest
Mhm.
as an individual, that you see, even if you just see 10, you're like, well, which 10 should I pick? How should I do
Mhm.
it?
Right.
So we really want to encourage employers to include services such as investment services that would help their participants make better use of their plans.
Mhm. And one of the easiest solutions maybe is to have employers pay those fees outside of the plan. It makes it a lot cleaner from a fiduciary standpoint if the employer is writing a check and not pushing those back to participants, right?
Well, but we've also seen the irony of that even in some of these lawsuits where the employer was paying the fees and they were still sued claiming that the fee was too high, even though the employer was paying part of it.
Yeah, well, that doesn't
So
make
the
any
employer had
sense.
paid about 50% of it. So the employee was really only paying, say, like $14.
Yeah.
But again, something to think about is money's fungible.
Mhm.
So if the employer pays for something here, it may not pay for something there. And
Right.
so that's when you have to try to look at the bigger picture. And I think sometimes those of us who do retirement, we only look at the retirement, but we also have to look at wages, healthcare, everything, and where do we want our dollars to go?
Right. And I've heard employers say, well, if I pay all the 401k fees, my employees are never going to notice it. It's not something they'll see. I'd be better off just giving them a 1% raise or something along those lines. There's better things for me to do with my money that will get me as the employer more recognition than paying the 401k fees because nobody will notice or appreciate it.
Well, we know that they're not even looking at them right now because the fee disclosures that we currently have,
Mhm.
they're not, obviously not looking at them when these lawsuits are coming down and they're putting the wrong number on the fee, even though the participant has. I mean, I know when I log on to mine, first thing I do when I pull up my statement, it's right there. I know exactly how much I pay in fees.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things I'd like to see personally, if I could sort of wave a magic wand, is the employer fee disclosures are intentionally lengthy, I think, to some extent, and there's no uniformity. It would be nice to have a one pager that every plan needs to have that's maybe even on the employer and the employee side that just says, okay, all in, what are your costs in percentages and dollars, and sort of make them uniform across the board. That's one of the things I'd like to see.
Well, then we need to work together on this because
I know.
actually that's one of the things that we're advocating for right now is because, at the chamber, we're not big on mandating more employer disclosure because disclosure costs money. At the
Correct.
end of the day, it's there's no plan administration fairy. She doesn't come in and take care of everything. We
Mhm.
wish there were. But if we're going to have disclosure, we want it meaningful disclosure. And I think what the one thing that I've seen time and time again with all of these lawsuits is that this is not meaningful disclosure because nobody's reading them. Nobody's understanding them. So what can we do and how can we work together? Like you said, nobody's going to read 10, 20, 30 pages. They're not even going to read one page. How can we break this down to one paragraph?
Right. Right. Yeah,
Big
one
font.
page. Big font. I know. I know. At least 14 point. Come on, we can do it.
Yeah,
Especially now.
14
I
point.
mean, especially now if we can get to, so what are your thoughts on electronic delivery on some of these versus paper? How does that factor into the ability to read these or the ability to kind of get
Well,
through
we're
this
we
stuff?
we are definitely very big proponents of a participant should be allowed to get their disclosures how it works best for them.
Mm.
We do believe, though, the default should be electronic because we are trying to keep costs down. So it's ironic on one side, you have all these people screaming because, oh, look at the cost of the plans, and then trying to mandate that we do paper disclosures. I
Right.
have large employers who dedicate about $3 million just for their disclosures for their retirement plan. I said million.
Yeah.
That is money that could be going other places.
Mhm.
It would go back to research, it could go to the employees, it could go wherever you have it. So one of the things that we do like about electronic disclosure is the ability to layer.
Mhm.
Nobody knows what half these terms mean, but we all know that if we're looking on something online and it's underlined in blue and we click on it, we're going to get a definition.
Correct.
Or we can I could take that paragraph that gives you the very basics that you need, but embed in it if you want to dig deeper. And
Mhm.
so I think we have the technology, but sometimes in ERISA world, we're still back in 1974 when it
I
comes to
agree.
communication.
100%. Yeah. And I think a lot of times when people see things in percentages, it's tough for them to translate in dollars. And sometimes we look at things in dollars and they may look very high from a percentage standpoint, especially if it's a smaller plan or a newer plan. So having both of them on there, and even if we're sending fee disclosures to employers, make sure that they get it. Maybe there's something they have to log on and
Mhm.
acknowledge that they've seen it at least once a year, that yes, I've read through this. I mean, it might be like the terms of service that we all scroll through, but if we can have
That we
something,
don't read.
yeah, I mean, round and round we go. But it might be something that we could at least have them log in and check the box and say, yeah, I look at this, I understand it, and at least they've got a record of it, and that certainly wouldn't be that difficult to do from a
Yeah.
technology standpoint.
Well, and also, I'm also a big proponent of examples,
Mm.
is because sometimes these terms are very confusing. But if I have an example that I can see it, I was like, okay, that kind of makes more sense to me now that I have an example of what the percentage means. But I'll also be honest, we could go with you on percentage. There are a number of people who back in the day, remember when we had to do percentage is over of and all of that.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't understand percentages.
Yeah.
But people do understand examples. So one of the things that we're supporting in, Secure 2.0, the new legislation that we just had the retirement security, I always RSSA, I always forget that what it stands for. Sorry. There was a provision in there mandating that the Department of Labor, the departments, take a look at all of the current disclosures and do an in-depth study, bringing the community in on it. Because, like I said, a lot of these are going back to 1974. So we really back that is, let's just take a look at everything. Because there's a lot of stuff in there that just doesn't, maybe it was okay in 1974, but it's not okay today.
Right. I agree with that 100%. So we're in the middle of Secure Act 2.0. So we just passed the House. We're going to the Senate at some point. I've heard some predictions, maybe this summer, maybe it'll be sort of a last minute end of the year thing like Secure. Where do you think it's going from here?
If I could predict that, I wouldn't have to work for a living.
I know.
But we're seeing progress. I've seen a lot more progress than I thought. We had a great hearing in the Senate Health Committee last week. A lot of great ideas, a lot of talk about emergency savings, also talk about disclosures. So right now we call it Christmas tree time. So for those of you who don't work on Capitol Hill, is you'll often get a bill and it has X amount in it. So we have the bill that's in the House, it passed the House. Now the Senate needs to decide what they want to do. And we sometimes call it a Christmas tree because then people like to hang their own little provisions all over it. So it's like putting ornaments all over that bill that you had. So that's really the question that's going to come up is, we have heard talk like we talked about earlier, will there be emergency savings provisions added onto it? Will some things be stripped off? Will they take some of the ornaments off? We are hoping the mandate to provide paper statements will be taken off of there. And so I think from now over the summer, we're going to see a lot of people talking on the Senate side about what provisions, because we did have last year, Portman Cardin, they also had their own bill on the Senate side that had a lot of things in common with the current House bill. So we probably will see those, but then the question is what else is going to be on there? And that can easily take over the summer to try to work that out.
Yeah. How about you personally, or from a chamber perspective? What's your magic wand issue? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you put in retirement policy tomorrow?
Ours is more of keeping things out. That we have two-prong approach to what we're looking at is we have the right now, because what you see from Secure 2.0, there are a lot of small fixes.
Mhm.
And they're good, but and I've even talked to some of the staffers, is it's not this magic wand that's going to fix retirement insecurity for everyone. It's a good start, but it's not like this. We've now fixed it. We never have to go back to it. So one, we want to make sure anything that comes out is encouraging, even the tiny fixes, makes sure that it encourages all size employers, large, small, medium. We're really interested in sole proprietors, the self-employed, because we think that has been a big group that's kind of been left behind. So we want to just make sure everything encourages. We don't want provisions in there that discourage. And some of the provisions that have been talked about, they kind of sound good in a feel-good sort of way, but they don't have any data backing them, and all they're doing is adding administrative burdens.
Right.
So that is what we're doing right now. But a bigger picture is what we want to do is step back and look at our entire retirement system. And instead of just looking at it private sector, public sector, looking at it all together of how do employer plans work with Social Security, with private savings, because we looked at all that about 100 years ago and we haven't really revisited it yet. And so over the next few years, our project will be, instead of like taking a look at everything through the lens of just the tax code, let's think about what retirement security for Americans should be, what we want it to be. Then how do we get there through both the employer, the employee, and the government?
Right. And you bring up a really interesting point about self-employed or part-time, or even the phrase gig economy and that type of thing. One of the things I hear sometimes from small businesses are, well, I don't need a retirement plan because some of my team, they don't make a lot of money, or it's not something they'd be interested in. But what the employer doesn't understand sometimes is this person might be working 2 or 3 different jobs, or they might be making widgets at home and selling them on Etsy or something like that. And this might be the job that could be their retirement savings. So small business might roll out a program, and that person that's only maybe just making $5,000 a year there, maybe they take that whole thing and put it into their retirement plan. Or maybe they have a spouse that makes a lot of money and they're working for savings. So I think that's a misconception that we need to work with small businesses too, to make them understand that there's other ways that their employees might be earning income.
Oh, definitely. And working with small employers, because there have been some studies out there. Pew did some good studies where there's kind of the employees and employers are talking over each other. And one of the things that we really want to encourage is, especially for the smaller employers, is sit down. It's a lot easier if you have 5 or 10 employees versus if you have, 10,000. But sit down with your employees and actually just ask them what would they like.
Right. And a lot of times they don't even know what's available. So the employer might say, well, I've asked them and they don't really want a retirement plan. Well, nobody really wants a retirement plan. Nobody wants their paycheck to suddenly be 3% less next week. So, but yeah, educating your employees on why it's important, and certainly automatic enrollment, automatic increase, all of those things can help along the way.
Definitely. But
So
where we want to stand is to make sure that employers have that flexibility and are not mandated to do certain things, because one of the things that we do worry about is we are huge proponents of automatic enrollment. Absolutely. Inertia does wonders, but it doesn't work for all employers. And we want to make sure that there's not this one size fits all approach from Congress or through the administration, because if you've seen one plan, you've seen one plan. That every employer is going to have different needs. Large employers have different needs from other large employers. Large employers have different needs from small employers. So let's just give the tools for employers to be able to do what's right for their own employees.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd love to see something that helps employers out with new employees. A lot of times there's that 6 months waiting period or 1 year waiting period because they want to make sure the employee sticks. But at the same time, they're missing out on a year of savings potentially. So I'd like to see something kind of help fill that gap that doesn't burden the employers, but still make something available to those employees.
Right, and that's definitely the things that we're working on. But I think a lot of that also comes with educating the employer of, so what, they may leave, or they may stay. If you think about it, they may stay because, look, I have this emergency savings account my employer just set up for me. I have this retirement plan that my employer set up. But if I go over there, I'm not going to have that. So don't look at it in terms of, I don't want to do this because they're going to leave. Look at it in terms of, I'm going to do this to help them stay.
Right. And maybe they left because they thought the employer didn't care about them. They weren't making these benefits available. So, so big picture, U.S. Chamber, folks who might not be familiar with the U.S. Chamber, what is it that the U.S. Chamber does? It looked like you changed your colors or logo. Is that pretty recent?
We did.
Okay.
I'm so glad you noticed that. I think they are awesome.
No, I like
We
those colors
decided
and stuff.
we have been around for over 100 years, and we decided we just gave our building a new facelift. It is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So anybody who comes to Washington, D.C., please walk past 1615 at H Street. It's right across from the White House, so you can't miss it. What we are the nation's largest lobbying organization on behalf of businesses and on businesses of all sizes. And I think that's one thing that sometimes people forget, that like, oh, it's just for the big businesses. Nope. We have members from sole practitioners to 10,000 employees. And you know what? All of our members are equally as important, no matter what the size is that we're here to advocate on behalf of businesses, because we believe in innovation and believe in businesses. Because if you don't have employers, you don't have employees. And if you don't have employees, you don't have employers. Kind of works that way. So we want to see policies that work to encourage employers and help employers stay employed.
Okay. And I know you've put out a lot of great content. I was looking at your YouTube channel. You recently did a program on ESG, which has been a hot topic, of course, not just investing, but in the retirement plan space. Do you guys have a particular view on ESG and in being involved in retirement plans?
Our view is, and this is where I think there's a lot of confusion on this, is it actually goes back to 1994 on a very small issue. Then people kind of blew it out of proportion. But if you look at our most recent comment letters that I drafted on this topic, is we believe in letting plan fiduciaries be plan fiduciaries. You are appointed as a fiduciary. You have a job. It's not for the government to tell you what you should and shouldn't invest in. That's not how ERISA works. ERISA, you must employ a prudent process. And so if through your process you determine X investment is prudent, I personally don't care what that is. That's not my job. My job is not here. I'm not an ERISA fiduciary, and I don't play one on TV. But what we want to do is making it easier, not put up hurdles. Another issue that did come up for us quite a bit is there are people who are pro ESG, anti ESG, and I am completely neutral on it. I am what works the best for the plan. And for example, if you have participants who want a particular investment option, so you have your standard menu over here, and then if you have a number of participants who want an environmental option, so you go ahead and you have an option, maybe a mutual fund or an ETF that is geared more toward that. You still have an obligation to prudently select it. You can't just randomly close your eyes and be like, I want this fund. No, you as a fiduciary have to look, make sure it's prudent. If it's not prudent, you're not going to put it in there.
Correct. Yeah. And I think there was a time when folks thought that if you were investing along those lines, you could potentially be sacrificing something on the return front. I don't think that's the case anymore. And we said ESG without defining it. So I broke one of my own rules about throwing, but you're talking about environmental, social, and governance issues and funds that select companies. That's an additional criteria in addition to all the typical criteria that an investment might use. And you brought up an interesting point about participants could potentially be motivated to participate in a plan because they see that option on there, especially some of the next generation folks who might be disenchanted with Wall Street or something their parents went through in 08 or 09. But if they see something on the list that's maybe more in line with their particular views, if that gets them to put away 3%, whereas they might not have before, I think it's something we need to look at.
Oh, and definitely that's one of the things that we had worried, that there may be a chilling effect for that particular aspect of it. And again, the fiduciary still must prudently select that type of investment. So you're not giving, as you said, you're not giving up on the, having an imprudent investment in there. You still have to make sure it's there. And another thing to let our members know is the E, the S, and the G are very separate. And I always find it interesting, they've glommed them all together, but nobody's going to invest in something that has bad governance. That just as a general investment. And also on the defined benefit side, when you're doing that investment, if you do a bad investment as an employer, you have to make up the money in the plan. So there has never been a time where any ERISA fiduciary is going to select something that they knowingly is going to be a bad investment, because if it is, it's coming out of your bottom line to put money. You have an obligation to put money back in the plan if you lose money.
No, I agree with that. I mean, we're coming up on 45 minutes. I know you have to put your cape back on and save the retirement plan
Save
world.
the retirement world. One
Yes.
comment letter at a time.
Exactly. You got to get into your phone booth. Remember those things? Get in your phone booth and put on your superhero costume. Is there anything else you want to touch on, either from a U.S. Chamber perspective or anything you're doing in
No,
retirement policy that we missed?
I think this is doing great, and we really look forward to keeping up the partnership with you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Chantal. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.